Hello human beings, PowerGamer here. Wanna go sailing? No? Well, good, because I don't have a boat. Luckily, there's this new trend called chair sailing that I've really been meaning to try. Watch! This would probably be easier if I was in the water.
The Legend of Zelda, The Wind Waker. Remember, it's not just Wind Waker, it's The Wind Waker. Very important distinction. A prime example of why you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, since while this game is often hailed as one of the best in the franchise, when it was first shown off, people were furious, because God forbid they try something different. After Ocarina of Time was considered the best game ever made, pretty much everyone was foaming at the mouth to see what Zelda would do next. They ended up getting Majora's Mask, which wasn't exactly what they were expecting, but it was clearly doing a different thing that many people would come to appreciate later. Even before Majora's Mask release, though, Nintendo started making plans for a new Zelda game in the early development days of the GameCube. Once again, it was set to be directed by Eiji Aonuma, with Shigeru Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka serving as producers. Early concepts followed the same general design of Ocarina of Time, just with better graphics, and when the GameCube was revealed at Nintendo Space World in 2000, this famous demo was shown off where fans absolutely lost their minds. This was a huge step up from the N64, so just imagine what the actual game would look like. But this praise was very one-sided, as Aonuma hated the demo since he and the rest of the team thought the more realistic and gritty style had been played out, so they wanted to do something different. They explored several ideas before one of the designers, named Yoshiki Haruhana, created a more cartoonish design of young Link. They all loved this new style and quickly decided that that's what the game should look like. They used cell shading techniques to achieve this art style and decided the game should have a heavy emphasis on water and sailing since they felt it would lead to more unique gameplay mechanics. Interestingly, Shigeru Miyamoto was hesitant to use this art style, but ultimately gave in due to the sheer enthusiasm the team had for it. Sure enough, a new clip was shown off at Space World 2001, and people were, not thrilled, to say the least. I mean, their previous demo looked like this, and the new one looked like this, so, kind of a big jump if you ask me. Remember, back then it was all about making your games look as realistic as possible, so to go from a cutting-edge, at the time, Zelda adventure to something that wouldn't look out of place on Nickelodeon certainly rubbed people the wrong way. So they ended up not showing off too much of the game until they were able to make a playable demo that would provide more of an emphasis on the gameplay than the graphics. Development went relatively smoothly throughout the following year, although due to time constraints, 2 dungeons that fell behind on schedule were cut. The Wind Waker was released for the GameCube on December 13th, 2002 in Japan and the rest of the world in spring of 2003. And as a pre-order bonus, they included a GameCube port of Ocarina of Time, complete with the new Master Quest hard mode version of the game, which is one of the coolest pre-order incentives ever made. The game ended up selling over 4.43 million copies, making it the 4th best-selling GameCube game of all time, and of course it ended up being universally acclaimed upon its release. I mean, remember, this was a Zelda game after all. Though there was a bit more backlash from it than some of the earlier titles, people would ultimately agree that it was a great game, at least for a brief time period, because remember, Zelda cycle, but this game's criticism period didn't last as long as the others. It was later fully remastered for the Wii U in 2013, and recently it was one of the first games included on the Switch 2's GameCube Nintendo Classics for the online service.
Along with Mario Kart Double Dash, this was one of the first games I got with my GameCube, and I was very excited to finally give it a try, but I only managed to get about halfway through. Not because I didn't like the game, but because this is one of those ones where you put it down for a few months, and then by the time you finally get back to it, you're like, wait, what was I supposed to do again? So I'm looking forward to finally resolving that unfinished business, though I won't be playing the original GameCube version today, I'm going to be playing the HD version on the Wii U, because unlike Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, which still have some value in their original versions despite the remasters, this version is strictly superior to the original for reasons I honestly shouldn't have to explain if you know anything about this game.
The game doesn't really have much of an intro this time, we just get a basic little title screen, which is kinda disappointing, but at least the music's nice. Her story opens with a rare sense of continuity for the Zelda series, as it is directly connected to Ocarina of Time, specifically the timeline where Link was sent back, but then they carried on with Adam. Anyways, we get a recap of the events where an evil man attempted to take over Hyrule, but the hero of time was able to defeat him and then sent back to the past. But several years later, the evil man returned, somehow, and the hero did not, so in an act of desperation, the people of Hyrule plead to the gods for help in defeating him. So the gods proceeded to flood the entire kingdom, turning it into the Great Sea. Seems like a little overkill if you ask me, but I don't know, maybe that was the real reason Noah had to build an ark. Hundreds of years later, the legend of the hero of time has been passed down through the generations with the belief that a new hero would one day arise. As such, a tradition occurs where once they become of age, all boys must wear green on their birthdays, much like the hero. We then open on Outset Island, where a young girl named Aryll is looking for her big brother, who's of course our lovely little friend, Link. Yep, Link has an actual family in this game, which is pretty surprising. I mean, the most we had previously was his Uncle Tony in A Link to the Past, who is barely in it. Today just so happens to be Link's birthday, and Aryll tells him to go see their grandma. Much like Ocarina of Time, we're able to freely explore and can get into some fun shenanigans, like drowning a pig. Link finds his grandma, who, as expected, gives him the hero's green clothes, which he is not too thrilled about. She tells him she'll be making her famous soup at his birthday party tonight and to go get Aryll. We head back up to the lookout point, where Aryll gives Link her telescope as a birthday present, though he has to give it back at the end of the day. While looking around, this giant bird suddenly flies by, being shot at by pirates. The bird drops a young girl it was carrying in its claws, so Aryll thinks Link should go to the forest and check it out. We meet this guy named Orca, who trains us to fight before giving us the hero's sword and head off to the forest. We find the girl stuck in a tree and fight some monsters before she wakes up and falls to the ground. It turns out that her name is Tetra, and she's apparently the leader of the pirate crew. Not bad for someone who can't even see a PG-13 movie in theaters yet. Link follows her out of the cave, only to see that giant bird come back, swoop down, and grab Errol in its claws before flying off with her. Link almost dies trying to get her back, but Tetra saves him. Back on the shore, Link offers to come along with the pirates to save her. While Tetra is initially hesitant, this nearby mailman guilt trips her into letting him come along by saying that she was the reason the bird came to the island in the first place. Apparently, many young girls have been getting kidnapped lately, and all of them have long ears, much like Tetra and Errol, and the bird has taken refuge in the Forsaken Fortress. Tetra agrees to let Link come, but only if he brings a shield, so he goes to get the hero shield from his grandma. He talks with Tetra again, and they set sail for the Forsaken Fortress. Once they arrive, they launch Link inside via catapult, and he sneaks his way to the top, only to be grabbed by the bird. It takes Link to this guy, who looks suspiciously like Ganondorf, and then throws him off into the distance. Link nearly drowns to death, but he's rescued by someone. He awakens the next morning to find it was a talking boat known as the King of the Red Lions. The boat reveals that the bird was controlled by a shadow man named Ganondorf, and that he's the same man who tried to rule the world all those years ago. Now that he's set free, again, somehow, the world's being overrun by evil, and if Link wants to save his sister, he and the boat must work together to stop Ganondorf.
Honestly, the story isn't that much more complicated than A Link to the Past or Ocarina of Time. There's a different setting and some different characters, but at the end of the day, it is another collect the things to stop Ganondorf story, and it works fine enough. Though, again, they never actually explain how Ganondorf escaped, and I find that kind of weird.
I know the sentiment on the graphics has been stated over and over again, but I have to echo most people because it's true. This game is aged better than probably any other GameCube game, and possibly every other Zelda game. Because they went for a cel-shaded approach to the visuals, they hold up so much better than 90% of all other games at the time that tried to be more realistic. And if you don't believe me, the HD version kept basically everything the same. All they really did was up the resolution and maybe go a little overboard on the lighting sometimes, but who cares? This game looks great. It is so colorful, and the animation on the characters is outstanding. I mean, this has got to be my favorite incarnation of Link in the series, purely due to how expressive he is. In the N64 games, you can count the number of times he emoted with one hand, but here he has so much personality, despite still never talking. It's clear from minute one that he wants almost nothing to do with this birthday tradition, but he sticks it out anyway for the sake of his grandma. And that's only the beginning, because he shows far more emotions than any other Zelda game before or after, maybe Skyward Sword excluded. The soundtrack is also really good, though with the exception of the more prominent songs like the title screen music or sailing theme, I don't remember as much of it as Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask. The game itself is almost a direct continuation of the 3D Zelda style established in the N64 games. Movement feels the same, although it is slightly more accurate thanks to being on newer hardware. Use the A button for a variety of actions while using the B button for the sword, and you can hold up to 3 items at once, though instead of the C buttons you use X, Y, and one of the triggers. The only big changes are you can now crawl on the ground if you crouch without your weapons out, you don't have to run when throwing something, you can just hit a different button from dropping, and since there's a right analog stick, you have full control over the camera, which is much appreciated. This also lets you move around while you're in first person, and we can't forget the most important addition to Link's moveset. If you push the A button against a wall, you can slide to move across ledges, or siddle as the game calls it. Is that a real word, or is that just a typo? His array of items has seen some slight changes. We of course have some staples like the bow, bombs, bottles, the boomerang, which can now lock onto multiple targets, the hammer, which is now called the skull hammer, and it's huge, making it so much fun, and the hookshot. Plus the iron boots come back as an equipable item instead of gear, thank God. But for new items, we have the telescope, which lets you see things from a distance, and it's nearly useless, the grappling hook, which lets you swing across gaps and occasionally hit enemies, the Deku Leaf, which lets you glide at the cost of magic, and it's a fun concept, though you can't grab onto ledges, which I don't like. There's a vast selection of bags that let you store certain things, like bait, which I'll get into in a bit, items you deliver to NPCs, and spoils, which are little goodies you get from defeating enemies that are needed for side quests. The Pictobox, returning from Majora's Mask in the HD version, even lets you take selfies, and of course, the Wind Waker, which is a baton that lets you conduct different songs. It's functionally the same thing as the Ocarina of Time, only instead of pushing buttons, you tilt the right stick in the corresponding direction while playing it on timestamps that contain 3, 4, or 6 inputs. There's 6 songs total that you can learn, but I'll explain those more as we go.
Link himself hasn't seen that many changes when jumping up to the GameCube, and neither has the core Zelda formula of exploring, finding dungeons, and talking to people. However, the process of actually getting to those things is completely different from how it was before.
As previously stated, the world is completely covered in water, so the overworld map is divided into a 7x7 grid, making a total of 49 areas, each one containing its own island. Some of these are huge and required to visit for progress, some of these are small and give you an item or treasure, and some of these are just oversized rocks and nothing else. In order to reach these islands, you have to sail there on your boat, and this is pretty cool. At first. Remember how my biggest complaint with Ocarina of Time was how big and empty Hyrule Field was? Well, the Great Sea is even bigger, and it isn't just the middle area, it's the entire thing. Now, thankfully, there is a lot more content in here than Hyrule Field, since, like I said, there's 49 different islands you can explore, and most of them do have something, like a heart piece, an extra item, or a great fairy fountain, which gives you some kind of upgrade. And finding each of these islands can be pretty fun. There is a really good sense of adventure in this game, sailing on the open seas, hunting for treasure like a pirate. The only downside is in between these islands is a whole bunch of nothing. There are some things you can find, like enemy pirate ships you have to fight or treasure spots you have to search, but the vast majority of traveling on the ocean is just going from one location to another, and with how big the ocean is, that can take an annoyingly long amount of time. Look, I like exploring as much as the next guy, but sometimes I don't want to check every nook and cranny of the game, I just want to get a move on. Many times the required areas are so far spaced out that it takes several minutes just to get to where you want to go, even if you don't stop a single time. And while there are some neat things you can discover along the way, there isn't enough to justify how big the ocean is and how long it takes for you to actually move, especially since you don't get the ability to fast travel until about halfway through the game. The sensation of sailing is cool and all, but it wears off after a while. If all that wasn't enough, sailing isn't just as simple as going from point A to point B. You can only move in the direction the wind is blowing and some of the directions adjacent to it. If it's not going the right way, you gotta whip out the Wind Waker and play the Wind's Requiem to change this direction, which just slows things down even more. And if you miss something and need to turn around, you gotta put the sail down and cruise with the trigger button, which takes forever. And this can happen pretty frequently because in order to even map the island on your chart, you have to find one of these fish jumping around, go over to him, and then throw bait into the water for him to mark it on your map, and he also gives you a hint on where to find something. With the exception of maybe 2 or 3 islands, you have to manually mark every single one, and the only way to get bait is to buy it from this guy in a boat named Beetle. So if you want to complete the map, you have to buy, at minimum, 46 pieces of bait, which just makes things take even longer. Now, this isn't required in order to beat the game, but it is highly recommended since it provides a lot of help at the end. Now, thankfully, the HD version mostly fixes this issue. On Windfall Island at night, there's this house that runs an auction which can let you bid on different items. Most of them are things that are only helpful if you're going for 100%, but the HD version added a new one, the Swift Sail. If you successfully win it, you can whip out this thing at any given time, which automatically changes the wind to whatever direction you're facing and lets you move twice as fast. The Swift Sail genuinely cuts the amount of time sailing takes by more than half. It is an absolute game changer, and apparently the only reason it wasn't in the original game was because the GameCube didn't have enough memory to make it move that fast. This alone makes the HD version superior to the original, and surprisingly, that's not the best change that it added, but we'll get there when we get there.
Sailing is a solid idea and has some good elements, but sadly a lot of it just ends up feeling like filler because of how long it takes.
On the islands, things get a bit more interesting. If there's one thing I can give Wind Waker credit for besides the graphics, it's the characters. You come across a wide variety of faces along your journey, and all of them are pretty memorable. They're not Majora's Mask quality, but the game still has a great cast. Mainly the humans on Windfall Island, like this rich guy who actually gets mad at you for breaking his stuff, which is a first for the series, Zunari the salesman who initiates another trading quest in addition to the previously mentioned auction, the shady bomb shop owner, the very friendly teacher, and my personal favorite, this guy who runs a pirate game place. The actual minigame is just Battleship, but he pulls out these cardboard cutouts to help sell the immersion to kids, and he clearly doesn't want to be there, but I don't know, that just makes it a lot more endearing. But we've also got some new species to the Zelda world, like these bird people called the Rito, and these little tree guys called Koroks. Stuff like this does a really good job at making the world feel alive, and of course it brings back everyone's favorite character, Tingle, who in the original game would actually allow you to hook up your Game Boy Advance to find some extra items, which was cool, though it doesn't make him any less odd. And unlike previous Zelda games, cuckoos are nowhere to be found. Alright, chicken, you got lucky. For now. But it wouldn't be a Zelda game without dungeons, and this game, while still having more than Majora's Mask, doesn't have as much as Ocarina of Time or even most of the 2D Zelda games. There's only 7 total, and even then, one of those is a mini dungeon that you have to go through twice, which is pretty annoying, and the last one is about as complex as the moon from Majora's Mask. But I guess they wanted the game to have the same length as the N64 titles, so the dungeons are a lot longer than previously. Yeah, by far my biggest problem with Wind Waker is the pacing. I already talked about how tedious the sailing can be, but the dungeons continue that mindset because these things go on for ages. Aside from the mini one, every single dungeon in this game took me over an hour to complete. Now, some of those were just because I got really stuck, but still, there's a lot of rooms in these places, and a lot of these puzzles can get pretty annoying. Thankfully, they have these pots that warp you around the dungeon, which can cut down on backtracking, but there's only like 3 per dungeon, and they're rarely in places you most frequently need to backtrack to. But what also makes this game pretty slow is the combat. It's the same system as it was in Ocarina and Majora, but it's a lot slower for 2 reasons. The first is this new parry system, which is the main method for taking out bigger enemies. If you lock onto an enemy and push the A button when this icon appears, Link will automatically dodge their attack and deliver a strong blow, which in the cases of these dark nuts will remove their armor, making them vulnerable. The system is pretty solid, though it does lead to a bit more waning, which I don't mind too much. What I do mind, though, is delivering any meaningful damage to enemies will cause them to fall down, and you can't hit them until they get back up. And when you have multiple enemies doing this constantly, it makes the fights feel a lot longer than they should be. But surprisingly, this is by far the easiest game in the series so far. I only died like 2 times, and they were at the beginning when I barely had any hearts. Because in addition to stronger enemy attacks being much easier to avoid thanks to the parry system, enemies themselves barely do any damage to you. Attacks that would take multiple hearts in the earlier games now only do like 1 at most, and the game showers you with extra hearts, so going through the vast majority of this game is a breeze. I really wish some of the 2D Zelda games had this mentality.
I really do think there's a lot to admire about the Wind Waker, but a lot of parts just feel way too slow for their own good, so while actually playing it is fun, it's also pretty tiring since a lot of parts just overstay their welcome.
As for the boss fights, they work a bit differently. Instead of the traditional new item plus storage strategy that most Zelda bosses follow, these ones really have you use the environment around you in order to win, which I think is a great change of pace that helps them feel more fresh. The only downside is, again, some of these can take a while with how much damage you have to do to them. The only other combat combat changes are some enemies carry giant weapons that you can actually grab and use against them, which is a fun idea, though. Actually hitting them is delayed, so you're better off just hitting them with your sword most of the time. And sometimes they'll drop these pearls that you break apart to reveal all kinds of goodies, like hearts, magic, rupees, and spoils. But the items don't just apply to normal combat, they can also be used to outfit your ship. When you get bombs, you can fire them out of a cannon at surrounding enemies, and the grappling hook can be used to find sunken treasure. As you're sailing, you'll occasionally see these glowing spots that disappear if you get close to them. If you use the grappling hook in the correct spot, you can fish up a treasure chest that'll give you extra resources. But hidden throughout the game are these treasure charts, which mark the location of a treasure near one of the islands, and you have to go find it. These spots only appear once you have the chart, but they contain much better stuff than the normal ones, like high-value rubies or heart pieces. And some treasures require you to either climb these towers and fight enemies, or kill one of these giant octoroks with the boomerang. I guess all that's left to talk about is the new features added in the HD version. Well, some items have been swapped around, but there's also a new tingle bottle you can get, which lets you post things to Miiverse. Never mind. And there's a bunch of quality of life improvements thanks to the gamepad. It provides the menu for your map and items, which is really helpful since you don't need to pause the game to figure out where you're going or swap what items you have. The Wind Waker and ship items have been mapped to the D-pad so they don't require their own item slots, and the gyroscope can now be used to aim things like the bow and hookshot, much like the 3DS remasters.
Gotta say, the Wii U may have its fair share of blunders, but it made one of the most popular Zelda games of all time even better, so every dog gets its day, I guess.
After leaving Onset Island, Link converses with Tetra before she sends him downstairs to meet with this kid named Nico. He has Link play a little jumping game where you learn how to swing on ropes, and then gives him the spoils bag as a reward. They arrive at Forsaken Fortress, but find it overrun with guards, so to get Link inside, they put him in a barrel and then launch him out of a catapult where he slams into a wall and loses his sword. So he has to make his way up the fortress without it. Yes, the first major area of this game is a stealth section where you have to move slowly and hide in barrels to avoid these spotlights and enemies. If you get caught, you get thrown in the brig and have to start over. Yeah, this is not a fun way to start the game. Sneaking around takes forever, and the fortress is one giant circle, so it can be really easy to get stumped. There's a somewhat fun idea of you grabbing these things that work kind of like the Deku sticks, only they're not a consumable item, yet you can't carry them with you between rooms, so the only enemies you can kill are the ones operating the spotlights. This place sucks. I hated it in the GameCube version, and I still hate it here. Once Link reaches the top, he finds the kidnapped girls, including Errol, but like I said earlier, things don't go well after that. He meets the King of the Red Lions, who reveals he doesn't have a sail, so Link needs to get him one if they're gonna go anywhere. Then how was he able to save Link in the first place? We explore Windfall Island, which is the main hub for humans aside from Outset. You speak with Zunari and find out his friend was unfairly arrested. If you go in here, you find Tingle locked up, where he, of course, mistakes you for a fairy and asks you to let him out. Hit this switch and he gives you either the Tingle Tuner or the Tingle Bottle, depending on the version, as well as Tingle's chart, which shows you where his island is. But if you go back here and explore this maze, you can get the Picto Box, so he really was a thief. Talk to Zunari again, and he sells you a sail, so now we can finally get a move on. The boat has a sail east towards Dragon Roost Island, home of the Rito, and a giant dragon named Valoo. When you arrive, he tells you to acquire something called Din's Pearl, and gives you the Wind Waker. Yeah, there's no build-up or anything, it's just given to you. Kinda weird, but if you go back here and read the stone, you learn the Wind's Requiem. Speaking with the Rito reveals that Valoo is angry, and they can't find a reason why, but his anger is preventing some of them from growing their wings, one of which being their Prince Komali. They give us a delivery bag and tell us to speak to this girl named Medley, who's one of the most adorable characters in Zelda history. She gives us a letter from the chieftain to the prince, and we bring it to him. He's too scared to face Baloo and gets the scale for his wings, so he's holding on to Din's Pearl for comfort, since it was a gift from his late grandmother.
Normally grandparents leave their kids jewelry or a stuffed toy or something, but I guess an artifact of the gods works too.
We speak with Medley outside, who says that Baloo's anger has caused this lake to be dried up. She then asks Link to pick her up and throw her to reach a shrine at the top of a peak. We oblige, and she gives us a bottle as thanks. Use it to scoop up some water, regrow this Braum flower, and break open the rock to refill the spring. Now we can enter our first real dungeon, Dragon Roost Cavern. It's a lot more intense than most beginning dungeons, solely due to the fact that it's filled with lava, so it's pretty easy to lose more health than intended. You gotta cool parts of it with these water pots, but they don't last very long, and sometimes you gotta ride lava geysers to reach higher areas. You find out Medley was captured by these moblins, and when you break her out, she explains that the monsters are doing something to Baloo's tail, which is causing his anger. She then gives you the grappling hook and heads back. The boss is Goma, who's much bigger than in previous games and swimming in lava. You can't hurt its shell, so you gotta use the grappling hook to grab Baloo's tail and yank the ceiling down to break it. Once you do that, just avoid its pincers and slash its face. Baloo calms down and the island returns to normal, so Komali gives you Din's Pearl. We're then told to visit the Wind Shrine, but I already did that, so we're out of here. We head south to the Forest Haven, which is home to the Great Deku Tree and Faeror's Pearl. Go inside and knock these Clues off the Deku Tree, who realizes Ganondorf has returned. He introduces you to the Koroks, who are conducting their annual ceremony, but one of them, named Makar, has fallen into the Forbidden Woods. We're then given the Deku Leaf, only we have to climb up in order to reach it, which just seems like a waste, and then asked to save Makar. Head outside and glide over here to reach the Forbidden Woods. A fairly simple dungeon that revolves around shooting yourself out of these flowers that restore magic, which is nice, and blowing these fan things to move platforms, which is kind of annoying. But not as annoying as these little urchin things you need to shake off. We get the boomerang, dive deep into the bottom, and fight Kale Demos, a giant flower that requires cutting these roots with the boomerang and then slashing the core before it eats you, which is kind of tricky. This is the only boss in the game that actually managed to kill me. We save Makar and head back where the Great Deku Tree gives us Faeror's Pearl as thanks, and the Koroks go to spread their seeds across the sea.
That sounded way way less dirty in my head.
We then sail to the Great Fish Isle to find the last pearl, only to discover it's been destroyed. The mailman flies in and says that the Great Spirit Jaboon has fled to Onset Island, but the cave he's in has been sealed off. The pirates apparently went looking for him, but they couldn't get in, so they went off to Windfall Island for supplies. So we head back there and sneak into the bond shop to find them robbing the place. They ask to stay the night, and Tetra only agrees after she spots Link because I guess she likes a challenge? Overhear their password, which is different for every playthrough, and then input it to get back into the ship. Here, Nico has you play another swinging game, which is much more annoying, and as a reward he gives you bombs, but Tetra is aware of this thanks to a special stone she gave Link earlier that lets her communicate with him. Make a beeline for Outside Island and use the ship's new cannon to break into the cave. Here we meet Jaboon, who gives us Nehru's Pearl. Yeah, there's no dungeon for this one, almost like it was cut. Now we sail to the 3 islands marked on the map and place each of the pearls to awaken the Tower of the Gods. This place has levels of water that constantly rise and fall, and a room where you need to grab 3 of these statues and bring them to the center. This is where you learn the command melody, which allows you to take control of nearby beings, like the statues. It's also where you get the bow. At the top of the tower lies the Guardian, known as Godon, another giant floating head and hands. This is one of the easiest boss fights I've ever seen. Shoot the hands, then the eyes, and avoid this really predictable attack. Hell, he even gives you more arrows if you run out, so this final test is a joke. We then ring this bell and open a portal into the ocean. The boat takes us through, and it leads to one of the coolest parts of the game. We find Hyrule Castle completely frozen in time, solve this basic Triforce puzzle, and go down in the basement to get the Master Sword. Taking it resumes the flow of time to the castle, and you have to kill every single enemy in here in order to leave. There's a lot of them. With the Master Sword in hand, it's finally time to return to the Forsaken Fortress and save Errol. Unfortunately, this requires going through this place a second time, and while it is better since you can actually fight the enemies and you get the Skull Hammer, you still have to go up these towers because otherwise you end up getting shot down, which is insanely annoying. Why does this place just want to waste my time? At the top you find the girls again, and Tetra shows up. She has her pirates break open the cage and seemingly recognizes the Master Sword. The girls are taken back and the palace starts to flood, so Link runs up the tower to fight the Helmarok King, that giant bird from earlier. Avoid his attacks, break his mask with the hammer, and then shoot him with arrows. He dies, and you run into the final chamber where Link comes face to face with Ganondorf, who formally introduces himself this time. He reveals that the Master Sword served a second purpose of acting as a seal on his magic, and by releasing it, Link reawakened his full power. I'm starting to think Link should stop taking this thing. Link attacks, but it doesn't do anything, since the sword seems to have lost its power to repel evil. Tetra then shows up, and Ganondorf grabs her, but the Triforce of Power on his hand starts glowing, revealing that she's the one he's been looking for. The Rito then swoop in to save Link and Tetra, with Valoo sending fire to the fortress. They fly them back to the Tower of the Gods, and the boat takes them back beneath the waves. Tetra wakes up, and Link is told to bring her to the basement. Inside, they find this strange man who reveals that Tetra's stone belonged to the Hyrulean royal family, and he's the one who made it, as he is in fact the spirit of Hyrule's former king, Daphnis No Hansen Hyrule, or as Link knows him, the King of the Red Lions. He explains that Ganondorf's return was unstoppable, so they left their fate in the hands of the gods, who stopped him by flooding the kingdom and sealing it away at the bottom of the ocean. But they also chose who would build a new country and commanded them to take refuge on the mountaintops. Don't ask what happened to everyone else. He then reveals that Tetra's necklace is actually the Triforce of Wisdom, and puts the final piece inside, transforming her into her true form. Princess Zelda. The king says Link must restore the power of the Master Sword to stop Ganondorf, and Zelda has to stay in the castle for protection.
It's worth pointing out that this is one of the more controversial aspects of Wind Waker's story, since unlike Sheik, Tetra had no idea she was Zelda previously, and now that she does know, she just ends up sitting in the castle instead of actually doing stuff like she did before. But I think it makes sense, since like the king said, it's too risky for her to leave, since if Ganondorf gets her, there's no stopping him.
Zelda apologizes for all the trouble she's caused, and Link heads outside. The boat says that the Master Sword losing its power must be the result of something happening to the sages that gave that power to the blade. So we need to head to the Wind Temple in the north and the Earth Temple in the south to investigate. What's cool here is that you can actually visit these temples in either order you want, which is a first for the Zelda series, though they play out nearly identically, and actually getting to them requires several fetch quests. First you have to go to the Mother and Child Isles to go near a tornado and find this guy. Shoot him with a few arrows and he'll teach you the Ballad of Gales, which finally lets you fast travel. Using this is the only way to get into the island, or the Great Fairy gives you the fire and ice arrows. You need to go to Fire Mountain and Ice Ring Isle and use the opposite arrows to get inside and complete whatever challenge is in there under a time limit. Inside you get both the Iron Boots and the Power Bracelet, which allow you to enter the 2 shrines. Inside, you learn 2 songs, the Earth God's Lyric and the Wind God's Aria, before you then see the spirit of the sage who was killed by Ganondorf, and they tell you to find the new sage who has the same instrument as them. This is also when you can learn the last song, the Song of Passing, from this Elvis guy that lets you fast forward the day or night, something I initially forgot to do, and get the incredible chart, which, trust me, will be important later. Spoiler alert, the 2 new sages are your companions from the previous dungeons, Medley and Makar, so let's start with Medley. We find her playing a harp, and after a brief discussion about Prince Komali, play the Earth God's Lyric, and she has a vision of the former sage. She realizes she's a sage of the Earth Temple, so we make our way there and play the song again to get inside. This dungeon is basically an escort mission, but thankfully it's nowhere near as annoying as Jabu Jabu's belly. Not only because Medley isn't an annoying brat, but she actually follows you to places, doesn't go back to the start if you leave her behind, and she's needed to solve certain puzzles. By playing the command melody, you can take control of her and use her to fly around the temple and activate switches. Plus you can pick her up and she can fly you over gaps. But the main puzzles come from these light beams that you have to use her harp to reflect, which can get of fog, remove statues, and kill certain enemies. Eventually, you get the mirror shield, which lets Link do the same thing. The only downside is this is by far the longest dungeon in the game. Between all the switching back and forth and puzzles that can be kind of confusing, I was in here for almost 2 hours. Though part of that was because I didn't realize you were supposed to move this mirror. The boss is these ghosts that fuse together to form one being named Jalhala. Use the mirror shield to shine a light on him, then pick him up and throw him into one of the spike walls, which allow you to kill the ghost. Kill them all and you win. Honestly, a pretty fun idea, and I like how it utilizes both the dungeon item and the item needed to get into the dungeon. After killing it, Link conducts medley, and together they restore some of the Master Sword's power. Now it's off to Makar, who's practicing for an Exeter ceremony. Play the Wind God's aria for him, and he also has a vision revealing he's the sage, though it's a lot more lighthearted than medleys. Go back to the island, play the song, and we reach the Wind Temple. Once again, you use the command melody to control Makar, only instead of light reflection, he plants seeds that can grow these trees. Other than that, all this place has is wind. Lots and lots of wind, which leads to this really annoying final room involving blades. You get the hookshot, and the boss is Mulgara, a sand serpent that sucks you in, and you gotta hit its tongue with the hookshot and then slash. While you're doing this, he summons these other little snakes that you have to kill, which are kind of annoying, but overall this fight isn't too bad. Link conducts Makar, and together they fully restore the power of the Master Sword.
So now it means we can finally go take on Ganondorf, right? Ha! You wish! Because now it's time we finally get to by far the most infamous part of the Wind Waker. The Triforce Hunt.
Yeah, the boat mentioned this earlier, but here's when it actually becomes important. Because 2 of the planned dungeons were scrapped, they decided to pay tribute to the original Zelda game by making it so once you beat all of the dungeons, you are required to scour the seas for the 8 pieces of the Triforce of Courage. Remember that incredible chart I mentioned earlier? Well, that was a gift from Tingle that cost a 200 rupee delivery fee, take that as foreshadowing, and marks 8 islands on the map that you need to go to. In the original, each of these islands require you to solve some sort of challenge, and as a reward you would get a Triforce chart, which would then tell you the location of one of the Triforce shards. Thing is, Link is unable to interpret these charts for some reason, and that's where Tingle comes into play. He's able to decipher these charts and will do so for you at the mere cost of only 398 rupees per chart. If you thought Wind Waker was slow before, this brought the game's pacing to a crashing halt. There is no way you're gonna have enough rupees by this point, even if you got both wallet upgrades, so you gotta go farming, and it takes forever to get that kind of cash. But this is where the best change of the HD version comes into play, as the number of charts has been reduced from 8 to only 3. The more complicated islands just reward you with the Triforce shards themselves, not only making the hunt itself much faster, but the total number of rupees required goes from 3,184 to only 1,188. A far more manageable amount that, even if you don't have from the start, isn't too hard to collect as you're getting the other pieces. If the Swiss sale wasn't enough to make this the superior version, this sure as hell cemented it. But sadly, the Triforce hunt can still be pretty exhausting. Most of them just require you to go inside a cave or fight some enemies, but there's 4 in particular that are much more complicated. One requires you to play hide and seek with these kids so you can give their teacher these joy pendants to get a deed to a private oasis, and then you have to go through this maze underneath. One, you have to use a pear to control a seagull and hit these switches, which is annoying and cryptic. Another requires you to go hunting in a cave for a chart that reveals the location of this ghost ship that appears in certain islands during specific moon phases, and the longest one requires you to go through the Savage Labyrinth. This is a massive gauntlet of enemies with 50 floors total and very little health drops. At the 30 floor mark, you get the Triforce shard, so at least half of this is required to beat the game, though if you go all the way to the bottom, you either get a heart piece or the Hero's Charm, which is a mask that lets you see the health of enemies.
In total, the process of the entire Triforce hunt took me roughly 4 hours. Now, to be fair, I did fill in the rest of the map and get most of the upgrades, but still, this entire process was exhausting, and I don't even want to think about how long the original version would have taken me.
After finally collecting all the pieces, we can return to Hyrule Castle, which has been ransacked. We seemingly find Zelda, but it turns out to be a decoy created by Ganondorf, and he sicks these dark nuts on us. Take them out, and we can finally head through the back door where the rest of Hyrule is waiting. Use the Master Sword to break the barrier and travel along the path where we finally reach Ganon's Tower. For our final dungeon, this place is honestly really basic. Hell, it doesn't even have a map. The first floor is going through rooms themed around the 4 major dungeons, and then rematching their respective boss fights, only they have less health, either that or you just do more damage. Then the second floor gives you the ability to leave if you want to restock, or go through this maze where you fight Phantom Ganon. Play energy tennis or slash to reveal the real one, and then deliver a blow to make him disappear. Whichever way his sword falls is the door you have to enter to continue. At the end, you finally get the light arrows and warp back to the center where you destroy Phantom Ganon for good, and use his sword to break this wall. Okay, that is really cool. Climb up these stairs and find Zelda asleep with Ganondorf watching over her. He says that the gods destroyed the people of Hyrule by forcing them to live on the ocean, and okay, honestly he has a point, but whatever, we still need to kill him. He then surrounds himself in this giant armor. The fight is split into 3 phases, where the main goal is always to hit the tail with light arrows. First it turns into a puppet, and you gotta cut these strings with the boomerang, but not all of them, or else they come back instantly. Then it turns into a spider and drops down, so you gotta make sure you're standing in the right spot. And finally it turns into a snake, so you just gotta stand off to the side. He escapes along with Zelda, so after some climbing, we reach the top of the tower. He goes on about the winds of his home desert versus Hyrule, makes this incredible face, and punches Link, sending the Master Sword flying. He snatches the Triforce from him, and all 3 pieces come together, but then the king shows up and touches the Triforce himself, wishing for the children to have hope and all of Hyrule to be washed away to destroy Ganondorf. I think there are better ways you could go about this. The water begins to flow in as Link and Zelda wake up, and Ganondorf attacks, leading to the true final boss, which is kinda underwhelming, but hey, at least it's cool that Zelda actually does something. She takes the bow and shoots light arrows at him while you need to slash and parry at the right time. Eventually you smack Zelda, knocking her out, so you're on your own for a bit. She does wake up later, and Ganondorf begins to perfectly block your attacks. If you talk to Zelda, which the game does not instruct you on, she says you need to distract him and to ready your shield. She then takes aim at you with the light arrows, and you need to use your shield to reflect them back into Ganondorf. Doing this allows you to parry one last time, causing Link to fly into the air, and he stabs Ganondorf directly in the head, which then turns him to stone, killing him for good. Okay, the fight was kinda meh, but that was awesome. The king tells Link and Zelda that he still thinks about Hyrule and was bound to it, much like Ganondorf, but they should live for the future instead of the past. He says goodbye, and Zelda says that he should come with them and that their land will be the next Hyrule, but he says it should instead be something new. Link and Zelda float up to the surface and say goodbye to the king. They emerge from the water, with Zelda returning to her original Tetra look, and they're saved by their friends. The credits roll via bubbles, and afterwards, Link, Tetra, and the pirates set sail for new adventures. Beating the game doesn't unlock a second quest, but I don't need to do that.
The Wind Waker is pretty solid, but not as great as it could have been. Unfortunately, it is really brought down by the pacing issues. I wanted to love this game, but it's about as long as Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask with significantly less content to it. It's just that what is there, while pleasant, takes a lot longer to do. So I don't really see myself going back to this one, unless I want to finally finish my original save file on the GameCube, but that's not gonna happen for a while. But overall, I still think it's great. The core gameplay is pretty fun, the graphics are great, and there's a pretty fun cast of characters. While it's not my favorite game in the series, it is still really good, and I definitely think you should play it. Hell, if you've never played a 3D Zelda game before, I think this is one of the better ones to start with, since there's a more accessible art style and it isn't that challenging. The only downside is the superior version is locked to a console the vast majority of the population does not own. Which is why I'm starting my own non-profit charity organization. We use for use.
I said before I remembered, nobody wants these things.